AFN presents A Scrapbook in Sound. On this special occasion, AFN Berlin's 16th anniversary, we invite you to join us in taking a sound journey, a journey that goes back to August 4th, 1945.
The first pages of our scrapbook are dog-eared and yellowed with age. 16 years, nearly a score of broadcasting years.
Years that saw AFN develop and thrive as it kept pace with developments from the vantage point of Berlin. AFN's early days were marked with frustration. First, there was the mighty job of getting the station on the air. A team of GIs drove through the streets of Berlin-Dahlem. Most of the houses were gutted or badly in need of repair.
But one house looked suitable. From the outside, it didn't look like much. The roof had collapsed, and many of the rooms were unfit for service. It would take a great deal of work even to get the grounds cleared up well enough to make the house accessible.
Inside, it was far from perfect. However, it did have one advantage. There was a small field nearby that was suitable for the erection of a radio antenna.
So this was it. The next problem was converting the rooms to soundproof studios.
What the job? Anyone interested in taking a war-gutted 27-room house and making a serviceable radio station out of it?
Requests went through channels for workmen and material. It was soon found that neither would be sufficiently available to get AFN Berlin housed in time to make the deadline of August 4th.
The 3rd of August, plans were made to get the station on the air regardless of whether or not the studios were completed.
And on the stroke of noon, August 4th, 1945, listeners tuned to 1420 kilocycles heard...
This is AFN Berlin, serving those who serve.
Berlin, caught in the whirlpool between East and West. In 1945, Berlin was devastated, violated, broken. Berliners, those who survived the bombs, artillery, tanks, found it grimly ironic that this was the city that was to serve as the capital of a new order, a 1,000-year Reich.
In time, the rubble was removed. Gaping craters were filled, and the city looked with cautious hope toward the uncertain future. 1945. Like the rest of Berlin, AFN had its work cut out for itself. AFN, the voice of information and education for the armed forces overseas. Not the least of our jobs was to help the American serviceman remember the life that he had left behind. AFN brought the United States to the GI in his barrack, in his tank, in his tent. Harry James was only a radio switch away.
AFN had a serious role, too. From the 4th of August, when its power tubes warmed up for the first time till now, AFN has added the dimension of sound to news reporting. The hot war ended in May of 1945. In a matter of months, the West found itself confronted with a new kind of war, and a new expression was coined to describe it. The Western Allies moved into Berlin in early June.
The Soviets were already firmly entrenched, and they tried desperately to impose Marxist ideology on the population before the British, French, and Americans had a chance to establish a foothold. When the Allies moved into town, they joined the Russians in setting up a four-power commandatura to govern the occupied city. Almost immediately, disillusionment set in.
Time after time, the West came to realize the Russians were following a policy of premeditated confusion. Their actions were geared toward dividing the West, toward creating mistrust and resentment on the part of the Berlin population.
In a word, the Soviets wanted the West out of Berlin, and the sooner the better. The Cold War had begun in earnest. The atmosphere was charged with apprehension, and the Allies got the feeling they were sitting on a powder keg.
April 1946. The Communists effect a merger of the Soviet zone of Germany with the east sector of Berlin.
August 46, the four-power Kommandatura forwards a temporary constitution to the city's Lord Mayor.
October 46. City holds first free election since the Hitler nightmare. Socialists win 49% of ballots. CDU takes 22%. And the Communists run a distant third.
June 1947. Berlin Council elects Ernst Reuter to serve as city's Lord Mayor, but the Soviets veto his appointment.
March 1948. Soviet delegation ruptures Four-Power Control Council by abruptly walking out of session.
April 48. Soviets demand right to control Allied traffic between Berlin and the western zones. The powder keg was about to explode, and the Allies were ready for trouble.
June 12, 1948. The Soviets announced that the Elbe River Bridge will be closed for repairs. In effect, the Berlin blockade had begun. By June 18th, West Berlin was virtually sealed off from the free world. Russian Premier Stalin's action obviously was intended to drive the West from Berlin and to starve out the population. Stalin was ready, almost ready, to do anything to cause West Berlin to be swallowed into the Soviet orbit.
The Kremlin blocked off canal traffic, road traffic, and train movement. The communist leaders, however, left the air corridors open.
The West met the communist challenge in a way that has become history, in a fashion that set the scene for the city's finest hour. Here is Air Force Colonel Dorr speaking from Tempelhof Airport and the voice of General Hoyt Vandenberg, another fading page in AFN's Scrapbook of Sound.
Not only the Air Force personnel, but the Army Transportation Corps and Quartermaster Corps are working around the clock to make this operation a success. It's hard work and long hours are required of everybody. But if you could just be here and see the Berliners, what they think about this, you would understand why everyone is so cheerful and willing to fulfill this extra job. The German people swarm around the edge of the fields every day, particularly on Sunday, just to stand and watch the American planes come in and take off. To them, every plane means not only food and fuel, but a renewed hope of a democratic future.
Thank you for that report, Colonel Dorr. I am pleased at this time to extend the appreciation of the United States Air Force over here to our men in Germany who are working for the success of Operation Vittles. The plans of the operation have been sound. Their execution is beyond reproach. Every man is doing his own job to the best of his ability and cooperating fully with the other members of the team. I am confident that when the story of Operation Vittles is finally written, it will add another brilliant chapter to the history of the achievements of the United States Air Force.
Who were the men that helped to carry Operation Vittles to success?
Captain Caffarelli, how many flights have you made on this Vittles operation?
Well, we've made many flights, and we're averaging 2 a day now. Every day we're working 16 hours on and 16 hours off.
Do you have any specific type of cargo you bring up, or just whatever they give you?
Nothing specific. We take whatever load they hand us. It consists of fruits, vegetables, canned goods, and all types of cargo.
Have you been having any trouble with the weather lately?
Yes, the weather's been our most difficult problem in the air and on the ground, both. The weather slows us down loading and also keeps us in the air a lot longer than we'd like to be in the air.
Lieutenant Cox is also a first pilot here, and officers tell me they do 50-50 on their flying run. How many runs a day do you make up here? The same as Captain Caffarelli?
We make the same as every day, on 16 hours, off 16 hours, making 2 runs each day.
Uh-huh. How long is your turnaround at Berlin?
Well, as fast as we can get off, maybe grab a bite to eat before we head back.
In other words, with your plane unloaded now, you're all set to go back.
That's right, after we get a clearance.
August 31st, 1948. The four-power military government meets to find a solution to the Berlin blockade. Relations with the Soviets, as the airlift planes drone ceaselessly overhead, grow progressively worse.
September 6, 1948. Following a violent Russian demonstration, Berlin City Council holds its first session in the British sector.
September 9th, 1948. Anti-communist demonstration rages at Platz der Republik against Soviet terror tactics. The hammer and sickle is hauled down from the Brandenburg Gate.
December 1st, 1948. All city magistrate offices moved to the western sectors.
April 1949. By this time, Operation Vittles has settled into a routine. On one occasion, planes are arriving from Wiesbaden every 60 seconds. And on April the 11th, 1 million tons of vital foodstuffs and supplies have been ferried into the island city.
May 1949. After weeks of negotiations with the Soviet realization that the blockade has failed miserably, the Reds agreed to permit free passage into West Berlin. AFN was there to cover this historic occasion. We call back our correspondent speaking from the Charlottenburg train station.
The trip was completely uneventful, a total delay of less than 10 minutes being encountered at the Russian zone crossing point. The all-important arrival at the Berlin-Charlottenburg terminal was ably covered by AFN Berlin's Bill Fitzgerald and Spiro Gallinopoulos. Here, in part, are their impressions of that arrival.
And it's early morning now in Berlin. And why are we here? Well, because we want to see and to attempt to tell you about the activities surrounding the scene following the lifting of the barriers which would permit supplies to roll as they should normally to these millions of humans who are to be sealed off from the rest of the world. The events leading up to our being here in this railroad station in Berlin at this unusual hour, we're sure are familiar to all of you by now, so we won't repeat them. But let's see what is expected to happen in Berlin momentarily. In fact, it has already happened. The train from Helmstedt, which was to arrive here, so the original schedule set at 6:30, actually came in at 5:30 this morning. Yes, sir, the train started out there at around 1 o'clock and came in here just a little bit ahead of schedule. We arrived at Charlottenburg Bahnhof this morning. The place was alive with correspondents, newsreel men, photographers, and just anybody you could imagine. A lot of military personnel here to witness the arrival of this first train to come through from the west. A bit of a sober note here, too, as we noticed the German people walking around the Bahnhof here. They weren't too happy or too celebrating about the whole thing. They were a little bit quiet and a little bit amazed at what was going on. Of course, it was a field day for, as we said, photographers, movie men, radio people, etc. But the train almost crossed all of these people up. As we said a moment ago, it came in at 5:30, and originally it was scheduled to come in at 6:30, and they thought it would be late. But I guess they couldn't wait out there at Helmstedt. They just moved right in. And at this moment, we are facing the train that has just arrived. And pouring off of the train were just hundreds of people who mounted this train back in Frankfurt and down in the British zone yesterday. They waited out at Helmstedt for many hours and then finally came through, leaving there about 1 o'clock this morning.
October 1950. "11 years ago, West Berliners received a gift from their American friends. Through the year, the Freedom Bell has come to symbolize the fighting, tenacious spirit of this troubled city. Paging through our scrapbook of sounds, we relive this historic occasion with our AFN correspondents.
Borough of Schöneberg, here in the American sector of the city of Berlin, where this morning the Special Events Department of the American Forces Network has moved its microphones to bring you the story of the dedication of the Freedom Bell. This is the great dramatic event of the Crusade for Freedom, which began in America several months ago. We will tell you more about the pomp and ceremony surrounding this historical event in just a few moments. But we want to call now on AFN's Bill Meinhardt to tell you something of the background of this great campaign, which has been dedicated to the freedom of mankind throughout the entire world.
In thinking and talking of any description of the ceremony that we're about to commemorate today, probably the most basic thing is the bell itself, high in the belfry overhead, 150 feet above the street here in the marketplace where hundreds of thousands of people are gathered today. Last evening I went up to the belfry, up the hundreds of steps, up to the shrine that will hold this gigantic 10-ton bell. It's a great bronze thing, 8 feet high, weighing 10 tons. There are 5 figures embossed around the bell, and these 5 figures represent the 5 races of man. They're shown passing the torch of freedom from hand to hand, and above them on the bell is the laurel of peace. And around the base of the bell is the inscription, paraphrased from Abraham Lincoln, that this world under God shall have a new birth of freedom. This bell was brought to Berlin by the National Committee for a Free Europe, staging now, as it has for the past month in the United States, a crusade for freedom. And as one California paper said, the crusade will oppose the big lie of communism with the big truth of freedom.
For 5 consecutive years, AFN's programs had reflected the spirit of the times. 1950. Jose Ferrer won an Academy Award for his performance in Cyrano de Bergerac. Carol Reed's screenplay of The Third Man was packing them in. and everyone was humming the haunting music from the film.
June 17th, 1953. Once again, Berlin drew the attention of the world. At this time, all freedom-loving peoples joined their spirits with the 100,000 East Berliners who had picked this day to demonstrate their hatred of communist tyranny. AFN correspondent Ed DeFontaine and program director Mark White give us a word picture of that day on Potsdamer Platz.
This is your AFN news reporter speaking from Berlin. We're going to try and recap the cause of this riot and exactly what is happening today here in Berlin, in the eastern sector of Berlin, especially near Potsdamer Platz, where we're standing right now. The riot started yesterday when construction workers on Stalin Alley rebelled after the government insisted on the 10% work increase. A small group of workers started to parade and protest and were joined by others at the project. The parade grew as thousands of East Berlin citizens joined in. Cries of "Down with Godevall" and "Down with Ulbricht" were heard as the demonstration turned into a riot. Workers last night called citywide strike for this morning in protest of the situation. The riot started again this morning despite the fact that the government canceled the work increase as of last night. Real action started shortly before 8 o'clock when thousands upon thousands of people marched to Wilhelmstrasse to demonstrate in front of an East-Zone ministry building. Stones were thrown through windows of the East Sector building and chants against the communist regime were heard. It was then that the Soviet troops came on the scene to help the Volkspolizei. Shouts of "Raus Ivan" or "Get out, Ivan" were heard as the truckloads of troops passed by. Stones were thrown at the Soviet soldiers as they moved by. The crowds moved back as the Soviets threatened with their guns. Tanks moved in, manned by Soviet soldiers. The crowd then moved to avoid the Soviet soldiers and burned a Volkspolizei shack at the edge of the border. In fact, several of these shacks were burned throughout the day. Here the crowd was in charge of the situation. The mob then moved to Potsdamer Platz, where we are standing right now. It was then that the tanks and armored cars began patrolling the area, firing sporadic shots, apparently to warn the crowd that they meant business. Just a few moments ago, one person was shot through the neck while another was shot while standing on Potsdamer Platz, not over 100 yards from where we are right now. Now from atop the electric sign overlooking Potsdamer Platz, we turn you to Mark White for another view of this situation.
From our vantage point overlooking Potsdamer Platz, we can see approximately 5 blocks into the east sector through the Iron Curtain. Soviet tanks are lined up all along Leipziger Strasse, which runs into Potsdamer Platz. All morning long and into this afternoon, East Sector workers have been protesting the increased demand by communist authorities for more work for the same amount of pay. We're in Potsdamer Platz this noon when shots from Burp guns and machine guns mounted on heavy Soviet tanks were heard firing in the East Sector. Reports reaching our AFN vantage point state that 6 East-Zone Germans were injured by the gunfire. Ambulances have been busy all day rushing injured demonstrators to hospitals. West Berlin police have been patrolling the area constantly. Several times this morning we witnessed West Berlin policemen escorting an obvious communist sympathizer into West Berlin. This action was necessary since the communist was being badly beaten by East Berliners. Police loudspeakers all morning kept urging the East Berliners to clear the streets to allow traffic through the Potsdamer Platz, also urging East and West Berliners to keep calm and maintain some semblance of order.
September 1953. West Berlin's popular fighting mayor Ernst Reuter succumbs to a heart attack. In the years preceding his death, Reuter had worked closely with the West, and perhaps his most brilliant hours were during the blockade, when he rallied the Berliners and helped them through those difficult days. We recall the announcement of Reuter's death by AFN's Ed DeFontaine and Mark White.
West Berlin's world-famous mayor Ernst Reuter died this evening shortly after 7 o'clock. Mayor Reuter succumbed to a heart collapse after being at home in bed with a serious case of bronchitis. There was no previous announcement declaring the mayor's critical condition.
That was Ed DeFontaine reporting from Berlin last night at 9. The first English report from this former capital informing the Western world of its tragic and magnanimous loss.
Ernst Reuter favored calling this tiny, well-lit hole in the Iron Curtain freedom's secret capital.
He was a miraculous man. He did more than anybody else to make the Berlin miracle occur. He made this isolated, forgotten, half-ruined, half-city actually the show window, the beacon, the refuge, the capital of the free world.
In the early months of 1954, Soviet Russia arbitrarily ended the occupation of East Germany. The Western Allies were quick to protest the communist maneuver. They declared their intention to hold the Reds responsible for the administration of the East Zone government.
In January 1954, Berlin furnished the setting for an East-West conference. The foreign ministers of Russia, Britain, France, and America's Secretary of State John Foster Dulles came to work out solutions to at least some of the problems that had hammered more rivets into the Iron Curtain. AFN Scrapbook and Sound is open to that fateful conference. Vince Lambros reporting.
The Soviet Union had agreed, after prolonged negotiations, to send Vyacheslav Molotov to Berlin to confer with his opposite numbers with a view toward resolving a host of outstanding East-West problems. On the basic problem, the reunification of Germany, there was some indication even then that the ideas of East and West could never be reconciled. No one was prepared for the masterpiece of calculated irrelevancy which characterized Mr. Molotov's performance of the past 4 weeks. The world hadn't long to wait to know that the Kremlin had agreed to talk with the West merely for the reaping of the propaganda value. Meeting alternately in East and West Berlin, the four ministers day after day argued to no avail on the major points on the agenda. These included a Soviet proposal to convene a meeting with Red China to discuss problems in the Far East, the reunification of Germany, and the conclusion of an Austrian state treaty. The Western powers were confident from the start that after 9 years of fruitless meetings, the Soviets at long last were willing to permit some measure of progress. But as the days and the weeks passed, it became more and more apparent that the Berlin Conference was doomed to inevitable frustration.
Mr. Dulles emerged from the conference with some discouraging conclusions.
The war ended in 1945 with every intention on the part of the Western Allies that a peace treaty would be concluded with Germany at the earliest possible date. The core of the treaty was to have been a united Germany, enjoying true political freedom, a member of the European family of nations, making its democratic contribution to the peace and security of Europe and the world. Yet you are here in 1954, American soldiers occupying Berlin. And a few miles away, there are British soldiers and French soldiers and Russian soldiers in this city which should have no foreign troops and which should be the capital of a united Germany. For 4 arduous weeks, the foreign ministers of Great Britain and France have worked hard with me to persuade our Soviet colleague, Mr. Molotov, that the time had come, in fact, was long past, for Germany to be united in freedom. We still hope that that result will be achieved. If we have not achieved it here, we shall persevere, confident that justice will surely prevail.
1955, a year of continued tension between East and West. Fears of a new blockade were raised when the Soviets increased the road toll for transport trucks traveling to West Berlin. Western officials called the move a cold blockade, calculated to cripple the city's economy. But the blockade never came off, perhaps because the Reds were not ready to suffer another propaganda defeat as they had in 1949.
May 1955, West Germany declared a sovereign state. The legislation, however, did not apply to Berlin, which remained under four-power control. The western sectors remained under military occupation under terms of the Allied Big Four Pact. But controls were eased. Laws could be passed without prior Allied approval, but the Allies reserved the right to annul a measure after its passage.
December 1955. The West sends another protest to Moscow after the Reds claim the four-power occupation of Berlin is ended. In the words of the U.S. Ambassador, James Conant, We will remain in Berlin until the day of German reunification and continue to aid West Berlin as we have done in the past.
In 1955, Mitch Miller soared to the top of the hit parade with the rousing rendition of The Yellow Rose of Texas.
November 1956. In Budapest, Hungary's freedom fighters were fighting Soviet tanks with everything from stones to Molotov cocktails. Communist authorities held their breaths, hoping the insurrection would not spread to East Germany as had happened 3 years earlier. 100,000 persons waged a demonstration at the Brandenburg Gate in support of the Hungarian rebels. It was reported for a time that the Hungarian embassy in East Berlin had fallen into rebel hands, but the Reds were said to have arrested the revolutionaries who had taken over during the uprising. The flame of liberty once again was snuffed out behind the Iron Curtain.
Berlin has long enjoyed the reputation of being one of the world's great cultural centers. Immediately after the war, with rubble still strewn throughout the city, plans were laid to make Berlin internationally famous as a film capital, a position it had held throughout the 20s and the early 30s. The International Berlin Film Festival was born, and each year thousands of persons representing the movie industry have gathered on the Kurfürstendamm to take part in the festivities. In 1956, Robert Cummings, the popular American actor, came to the festival and stopped to talk with AFN. October 1957. Dynamic Willy Brandt elected governing mayor of West Berlin. The young socialist was chosen to succeed the late Otto Suhr. Later in October, the Reds abruptly enacted a currency changeover. The move automatically canceled an estimated 15 to 20 million East marks in West Berlin alone. During the change, the East Zone temporarily sealed off East Berlin. This move prompted a protest from the Western Allies.
(1958). In May, John Foster Dulles assured West Berliners that America would not desert them. Any attack against the city, Dulles declared, would be treated as an attack against the United States. East-West relations took another turn for the worse in November when Soviet Premier Khrushchev bluntly told the West to get out of the city. The specter of the blockade once again was raised. The Kremlin made no secret of the fact that it wanted to force a recognition of its puppet regime in the East Zone. The West stood fast, however, and the communist pressure began to ease. Perhaps 1958 will also be remembered as the year rock and roll came to Berlin, and not without incident. From our Scrapbook and Sounds, we bring back Bill Haley.
Bill, how does it feel to be playing your first engagement behind the Iron Curtain?
Well, Bob, I've looked forward for many, many months now to doing our tour of Europe and to coming over here, and thus far I have been just overjoyed with every place we've appeared, and I'm sure that I'll enjoy it right here, too.
I understand that you just came in from Dusseldorf and had a pretty good turnout up there.
Well, yes, our German tour thus far has been sold out. We haven't had a seat that has been available anywhere, and, of course, nothing makes an entertainer happier than to have a sold-right-out house.
1959, and more red pressure. From March 27th till April 3rd, communist jets buzzed U.S. transport planes in the Berlin air corridors. The Reds argued that they were only showing the West that planes in the corridors must not fly higher than 10,000 feet. American officials, however, stated that the planes would fly at any altitude deemed necessary.
Early in 1959, Khrushchev issued what has become a familiar ultimatum. Either the West signs peace treaties with both East and West Germany, the Kremlin warned, or the Moscow Reds would sign a separate pact with the East German regime. President Eisenhower gave voice to Western feelings on the Khrushchev muscle tactics. We will not give up a single inch of our rights in Germany, especially in Berlin, Ike declared.
October 1959. East Germany has a new flag and feels the need to fly it over train stations in West Berlin. The Reds had long maintained that the elevated train stations, although situated on West Berlin territory, were to be controlled 100% by the communist government. When the Reds hoisted their hammer and divider flags over the S-Bahn stations, West Berlin police moved in quickly to take them down. Clashes occurred, and finally, with no fanfare, the flags were lowered.
Since 1945, 4 million East Germans have pulled up their roots and defected to the West. Refugee reception camps were established to accommodate the exodus. The biggest of these camps is located at Marienfelde, where AFN spoke with several refugees and learned their reasons for fleeing.
Since 1945, West Berlin has been a source of constant embarrassment to the communists. The city is, in truth, a showcase of freedom. Nowhere in the world can the contrast between the communist and free enterprise systems be observed so dramatically. East Germans who have ready access to Berlin can walk across the sectoral boundary and see with their own eyes the fruits of the free world. When they return to their homes in the zone to be bombarded by red propaganda, they remember West Berlin.
They remember the filled and glittering shop windows. They remember the rare experience of buying a newspaper, any newspaper, and the pleasure of reading it without drawing suspicious glances.
Since 1945, the red policymakers have done everything short of war to remove this bone in the throat of communism, this escape hatch in the Iron Curtain.
In recent months, the East Germans and their masters in the Kremlin have accelerated their attacks on West Berlin. Premier Khrushchev said a separate peace treaty with East Germany would be signed by the end of 1961, a move which would pose a serious threat to Berlin's lifelines. Khrushchev wants, at nearly any cost, to drive a permanent wedge between the two Germanys and make reunification impossible. Also, he wants the embarrassing situation in West Berlin settled on his terms. The West responded to the latest Kremlin challenge with a no-nonsense statement of firmness. Here's America's chief executive, John F. Kennedy.
And our access thereto cannot be ended by any act of the Soviet government.
August 4th, 1961. The clippings in our scrapbook are nearly completed, but there are several pages left for new sounds, new events which form the ever-changing Berlin story. 1961, 16 years of reporting the news, interviewing personalities, keeping a steady finger on the pulse of this dynamic, ever-changing city. Supplying the listener with the latest from the sports scene, keeping abreast of music trends from Elvis Presley to Leonard Bernstein.
16 years of consistent broadcasting, 19 hours, 7 days a week. On the occasion of AFN Berlin's 16th anniversary, the commanding general of the Berlin Command, Brigadier General Frederick O. Hartel.
Although I have been in Berlin only a short time, I am fully aware of the importance of AFN Berlin to our American community. AFN has been doing an outstanding job in providing American military personnel and their dependents with factual information, fine entertainment, and excellent educational features. In these days of fast-breaking news developments, all of us depend upon AFN for last-minute details on current events. Many of us tend to forget that behind the preparation of these stories for broadcasting are the soldiers and civilians, the technicians of the American Forces Network. AFN Berlin has become an integral part of our lives here in the divided city.
On the occasion of AFN Berlin's 16th anniversary, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Cranston, commander of AFN Europe.
As commanding officer of the American Forces Network, it is a privilege to offer congratulations to AFN Berlin on the observance of their 16th anniversary of broadcasting to the people of that divided city. We are proud of our Berlin outlet, which serves the U.S. forces in that area 19 hours daily.
And now a word from the station commander of AFN Berlin, Captain John Maloney.
During 16 years of broadcasting to the Americans in Berlin, this radio station has been privileged to cover and report events of universal interest. Many of those events have been recapitulated on this special program tonight. I think it proper to mention, however, that reporting the news is, though vastly important, not the sole mission of the American Forces Network. During our broadcasting hours, we try, each day, to offer entertainment by way of music programs and dramatic shows. Important also in our work is the projection of informational-type shows that are designed to remind all of us who are away from home of the principles and ideals of Americanism. Radio work can be, and is, an exciting and often glamorous thing, especially here in Europe, where radio has not had to face as much competition from television as it has at home. Most of the glamour goes to those whose voices are heard on the air. But behind these voices are the skills of members of our staff, without whose knowledge and experience in broadcasting we could not operate. I should like to compliment our chief engineer, Mr. Marvin Handelman, whose professional background and experience has kept this station on the air, often during times of distressing technical difficulties. And on the off-mic side also, our PFC Joey Welzant, the engineer in the booth, and Mr. Kurt Klein, our librarian and producer of two of our most successful network shows, Hymns from Home and Outpost Concert. Mr. Lothar Lehman, whose great skill in recording has helped us over many difficult situations. Mr. Gunter Loaf, whose talent as a sound engineer have been recognized and applauded in places as far away as the United States. And the other members of our engineering staff, De Haren Altner, Bartel, Peukert, Geiger, Storer, and Lichtenfels. And our compliments, too, to the staffs of AFN Europe in Frankfurt and the AFN stations in Munich, Nuremberg, Stuttgart, Bremerhaven, Kaiserslautern, Poitiers, Orléans, and Verdun for their contributions to network time, which are so much enjoyed here in Berlin. We hope that by continually making efforts to improve our work, we can continue to persuade you to keep your radios fixed to AFN Berlin, AM and FM.